Hi everyone, my name is Julie. This is Keep Calm with Books and Coffee, and today I am going to be filming a review of the Mirror Visitor series by Christelle Debose and translated from French by Hildegard Serlet. This is a high fantasy series, which I am excited to talk about. It consists of 4 books. I have read them over the last few months. I also listened to them on audiobook, which is read by Emma Feeney, and it consists of 4 books. The first is A Winter's Promise, The Missing of Claire de Lune, The Memory of Babel, and the final book is The Storm of Echoes. So it's these 4 books. They are beautiful covers. I absolutely love these Europa editions. They have so much detail and they are super beautiful. I love them. I got the first 3 in paperback, but the 4th one actually only came out in the fall, so I have it in hardcover. But I mainly listened to these on audiobook, like I said, so I was not too plussed about getting them in different formats. This series is about Ophelia, who is living a quiet life on her home arc of Anima. She works in a museum and she has a special couple of abilities. First, she is a mirror visitor, which means she can travel between mirrors locally. She can't do it like across the world, but she can like travel within her town across mirrors. She reads objects with her hands. Basically, she can touch an object and read its history and see, you know, all the way back to its creation, who touched it, who spent time with it, what they were thinking and feeling when they did that, as well as she is an animist, which means she can animate objects and put her kind of will and kind of personality into them and give them a life of their own. At the beginning of this book, she is engaged to a political ally of her arc. Arcs are basically like countries, and the rulers of her arc engage her to a man from another arc named Thorn, and when he comes to collect Ophelia, they travel to the Pole, which is another arc that is completely different than Anima. Anima is a pretty peaceful place. Each person pursues their ideas and wants and needs as they need to, whereas at the Pole it is much more politically charged and violent. It's a lot more made up of political families and feels a lot more like Game of Thrones. So she realizes after being taken to this new country, essentially, that she has to figure out this political game in order to stay safe, because it seems like her new fiance and his family are going to be just as much enemies as everyone else. At least that's what it seems like in the beginning. So we start out there and a lot happens in this series. I do want to mention the ratings that I gave each one of these books here at the top. I gave A Winter's Promise and Claire de Lune 5 stars each. I absolutely loved these first installments in the first 2 books. For The Memory of Babel, I gave this a 4-star, and the Storm of Echoes I ended up giving a 3.75 stars. There are some critiques here, obviously, but I don't want to discourage people from reading this series. Even though my ratings kind of went down over time, I still highly enjoyed this series and had a very emotional time reading it. I was super attached. I just think that over the course of this series, throughout the series, Christelle Debose has a very complex world going on. She spins a lot of different stories and plot points and creates a lot of different threads within the story. And I think my main critique till the end was that I didn't understand everything that happened. And I don't think that everything was resolved necessarily in the way that would make it feel like a completely satisfying ending. But every series in a way does that. There are things at the end of every series that you still have a question about, and I'm hoping that there may be more to this story. I have no proof for that. The 4th book was finished in 2019 and it took a couple of years to translate, and as far as I can tell, there's no news out there about more. However, there's a lot left that she could dive back into this world and explore in. So I'm gonna stay hopeful. Then I do want to mention a few content warnings. These are the major ones. I will list all of the ones down below. There is a lot of violence throughout this series, as well as some body horror. There's physical abuse, bullying, and sexism. And then there is kidnapping and suicidal thoughts. So those are the big ones. Like I said, I will list some other ones down below. But those are the ones that I think carry over through multiple books. And then there's other ones that happen in just a couple of books. The Steam rating for this, I would say, is a 2 out of 5. There is mentions of sexual content, but it's all fade to black. Like, there's nothing on page that is necessarily explicit. I think the most we get on page is like one kissing scene. So let's get into my overall thoughts on this series. The biggest part of this series is the world building. Each of these books is like 500 pages, and they are majority world building set up for the story. We get a lot of background information, and then towards the end you start to get answers and really get to dig into what is actually happening. Like, I would say throughout the first half of this book, in each book, I am confused. I'm confused and I'm a little frustrated because you start to feel, I said this in chats to people throughout reading this series, I would be frustrated for the first like couple hundred pages because I knew I was getting into information, I was getting dropped hints, I was getting the setup, but I wasn't getting any answers. But then there's a point in each one of these books where it starts to really take off. It's like you're going up a roller coaster, you're going, and then you feel yourself tip over the edge and start to race towards the end and figuring out some of the big answers and big questions that you have. So I loved that about this series. Even though it frustrated me, I felt like the payoffs were worth it. I felt like we would get to the end and there would be all of this accumulation of information, and I would be left with more questions to lead me into the next book. But I was satisfied with what we figured out for this book and this story that we were telling. I think you have to go into this expecting, which I didn't know, so this was a big shock to me. The first 2 books and the second 2 books have a huge shift in perspective. Not perspective, because we stay with Ophelia. Ophelia is our main character. We get a few other perspectives throughout the books, but mainly we are in Ophelia's head within what she sees and hears and observes. We mainly focus on her. However, there is a big shift between these first 2 and the second 2 books in kind of the focus of us. This first 2 books are mainly focused on the pole and Ophelia's political and kind of just presence there, political situation, as well as her presence there, and kind of what is happening with her and Thorn within the context of the pole. The second 2 books take us to an entirely different arc and change the focus to a much larger scope. Like we go from very focused on this one arc in the one political sphere to the entire world in the second 2 books. So that is a really interesting change. I do think it kind of did take down my enjoyment a little bit. I did love the first 2 books a lot. And then the second 2 books kind of changed the focus, kind of changed what I was expecting from the series, and I would say the first half of the duology is my favorite. Like I said before, there's a lot of political world building and the plot is slow to develop. The romance is the same way. This is a romance that you'll have to be very patient with. There's several books before you even get any kind of connection between the 2 main characters, between Ophelia and Thorn. So it's a very slow burn romance. I do think this series is going to be not to everyone's taste in that way, especially with the rise of fantasy romance and kind of the very romance heavy and maybe slow burn being a book long or a couple of books long. And I'm not critiquing that take, but if you are looking for like a true slow burn romance that's going to take several books, go from like hate to love or hate to, sort of tolerate and then move on from there, this is a series that you might want to check out. If you don't want to wait 3 or 4 books to figure out that piece, this might not be it for you, because it's very slow burn. I would say that the scenes that we get that are romantic, that do have our 2 leads together, really pay off. But it is, you gotta be patient and you gotta wait, and it is few and far between but impactful scenes. The other part of this series that I want to talk about is throughout this series, sacrifices are made. I think that if you are used to YA where we don't lose anyone, if you've read a series where you kind of think, well, you feel very safe, I'm gonna say that, like Sarah J. Maas, after you finish a couple of her series, you kind of feel like everyone is safe. I never felt like anyone was safe in this series. Like, there are things that happen and you feel like you could lose anyone at any time. And I really liked that about this series. I felt like the stakes were really high, and it just felt like we were gonna you were gonna get to the end, and you were on the edge of your seat each time to figure out what was gonna happen, who was gonna make it, if we were gonna, what we were gonna get out of this. So that was another thing. I think something else that brought down my rating of the 4th book was some of the language around disability, and some of I mentioned forced institutionalism as a trigger warning here, and there's some language here, and I'm not sure if it's a translation thing or if it's a just the actual language around this that just felt a little off-putting to me. I don't want to go into specifics because I don't have any authority to speak here, but just around some of the mental health language and the disability language felt a little off to me. I felt like it could have been challenged a bit more on page. But like I said, and I did look for reviews from disabled folks, and I couldn't find anyone that had written anything in English as far as a review that was there. I don't want to say that the text did anything wrong or said anything specifically wrong, but I just started to get a weird feeling around that part of the story and some of the kind of way it was approached. So I don't know. It's like one of those things where I can't quite put my finger on what felt wrong there, but something felt off and just sort of icky. So that was something that sort of brought down my enjoyment and kind of brought me out of the story, where I hadn't been brought out of the story before. I mentioned before that each book left you with a lot of questions. That is true even at the end. I kind of mentioned this before, but unlike the Crown of Shards trilogy, which is the Kill the Queen series that I talked about before, I've done a review on that, where I felt like the series was left open-ended on purpose in order to lead into another series, and I didn't feel like the author did a great job of satisfying you within that series. This feels satisfying at the end. Like, you do feel like this is the end of this story. You get some answers, but there's still a lot left open. This is quite an open ending, kind of an open to interpretation, especially for the amount of romance elements that are in here, but I still really enjoyed it. I'm trying not to give any spoilers as far as like what happens or anything like that, but I'm just trying to forewarn you that if you don't like an open ending, that this might not be for you. The ending of this series messed me up for days. I furiously searched the internet and kind of lots of different people's reviews to see if there was any hint of anything else happening, but this was quite a book hangover for me. I tried to start another book right away that night so that I wouldn't get in a book hangover, and it didn't work. I'm still a little bit kind of just feeling that because I haven't really read a whole lot this week, and I finished this series about a week ago at this point. So it's just sort of a I'm satisfied, but I still want more. Like, it's a good, in a good way. Like, I feel like this story wrapped up, but I still want more here. But I think that's everything that I want to talk about for this series. I did film already a spoilery discussion of this, mostly so that I could vent my feelings, because I had a lot of feelings in this book. And I also wanted to kind of get all of those feelings out before I talked about this series in a rational manner. So I will have that up as well, but that's going to be full of spoilers for the series and for the 4th book. So if you are interested in watching or reading this series, if you're here before reading it, don't go check that out. But if you have read this entire series and you would like to come discuss, commiserate with me, please come check that out and let me know what you think of all of that down in the comments. But that's it for me today. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to see me again, please hit the subscribe button down below, and I will see you next time. Bye!